Hello, we are in day 18. So today we will see how to handle errors in Mule flows. Actually, this is a very big topic. I will discuss in two separate videos. So let us get started. A typical flow normally contains error handling block. Also, if you see this one, there is error handling block. In every error handling block, you can actually configure something called as error handlers. Let us see what will happen if an exception occurs in any one of the flow. See this diagram. Let's assume that in this flow, the third event processor is throwing an exception. The subsequent event processors in the flow are not executed. And in the flow, if you have defined any error handlers, the subsequent error handler will be executed. Okay. So let us practically see what will happen according to one scenario. I'll explain you a lot of other things. So if you see, I'll be working on this exception start project. Here I already have defined three flows. First flow is taking a HTTP request using the listener, the main flow. So what is the URI /error. Then the next one is actually setting a variable by extracting a query parameter called as product name. So it's expecting a product name as query parameter. Now we are calling the next flow validate and transform flow. So let's see what is there here. In this validate and transform flow, I'm using something called as a validator, where I've configured a is true validator and I've configured an expression which says, say this is a list in DWL, right? So actually this expression will evaluate true if there's a query parameter called as product name and its value should be either HP or MAC. So if there is no query parameter called as product name, then and if it is not even HP or MAC, then this validator is going to throw an exception. So here in the second flow, I don't have any error handler. What will happen? So if a flow does not have any error handler, the default error handler will be executed. There is a Mule default error handler which is global and implicit. If in your flow, if you don't have any error handler, then Mule's default global error handler will be executed. What it will do is it will stop the execution of the flow and logs the information about the error. So this is implicit and we cannot configure it. Okay, now let me run this and see what happens. Okay, it got deployed and now let us make a request to /error using Postman. I'm giving a request to /error, but I'm not passing any query parameter as expected. If you see the second flow, it's expecting a query parameter called as product name, which should be either HP or MAC. Okay, so I'm not passing any query parameter at all. Now let's see, I'll give a request. I gave a get request. So I got a response invalid product name and I got 500 error. Why I got this invalid product name? If you see here, the message, error message which is thrown by validate component is true validator is invalid product name. And I got 500 status code. It is not success. 500 is server side error, right? So whenever exception is thrown by this flow, validate and transform flow, here there is no error handler. So what happens if there is no error handler? Subsequent process will not be executed, and then the error will be handled by the error actually will be propagated to the main flow. From the main flow we are calling, right? And here also we are not having any error handler. So if there is no error handler, the Mule's default error handler will be executed, and it stops the flow execution and logs information about the error. So error object contains two properties: error description and error type. See here, for each true validator, the error options here I configured the error messages invalid product name. Why this error message was displayed? So actually, if you see in HTTP listener configuration, there is a tab called as responses. In responses, there is something called as error response. See, success response is configured as payload. You can see. I'll just click on this. Success is configured as payload, and error response. Let us see what it is configured as. Oh, it is configured as error.description. So as I told you, whenever error occurs, error object is thrown. So error contains two properties: error.description and error.error type. So the error handler of HTTP listener is actually setting the payload as response body as error.description. That's why we got error.description here. But the status code, if you see, it is not configured. It is not configured here for error response. By default, if you don't configure anything, it will be 500 if there is any error. Now, I will make a small change in the HTTP listener. Here I'll make it as output as application / JSON, and here I will write error dot, what is the other parameter in the error type. There are other properties also like error cause, error description, detailed description, etc. Error dot error type I will write. Okay, so I configure it as a JSON. Let us see how it will be displayed. Now let me give a request again. I saved it. Hopefully the application should have been restarted. Yes, it's getting restarted. Yep, restarted. Now I'll give a request. See the response what I'll be getting. See, the response is a JSON, which is interesting. It is a JSON, and here you can understand what is the error type. Every error type will have two things: namespace and identifier. So here we can see that the error which was propagated was invalid boolean and belonging to namespace called as validation. For this error type, the parent is another error type whose identifier is validation and namespace is validation. For this again, the parent is another error type whose identifier is validation belonging to Mule namespace. Again, for this error type, the parent is this one whose identifier is any and namespace is Mule. And for this error type, there is no parent. So basically, you understood that error types has some hierarchy. I'll just show you. Mule colon any, you can see Mule namespace colon any is the highest one. Under that there are a lot of subtypes, and these subtypes also can have other subtypes, right? This is a error type hierarchy. So when error.type is displayed as JSON, you are seeing this kind of hierarchical JSON, right?
So every error object has these important properties: error.description and error.price. So what all others are there in error object? Let us see. I'll go to responses again. I'll maximize it. Here I'll click on graphical view. Error dot. See, error dot cause, error dot description is nothing but error message. Error dot type is what we have displayed right now as JSON. Okay, to summarize now, whenever exception occurs in any one of the flow, then in the flow, if there are any error handlers defined, the processor's event process in that error handler will be executed. But if there is no error handler, Mule default error handler is executed, which will implicitly handle all the error messages. What this global error handler will do, it will stop the execution of the flow and logs the information. Okay. We also understood that an error object is created and thrown. Error object contains these important properties: error.description, error.type. So error types are identified by a combination of namespace and an identifier. This is an example. These are the examples of error types. And we understood that there is a hierarchy for error types. In this example here you can see this JSON represents an error type whose identifier is invalid boolean belonging to namespace validation. And for this the parent is another error type whose identifier is validation belonging to namespace validation. For this again the parent is an error type whose identifier is validation belonging to Mule namespace. And again for this the parent is error type whose identifier is any and belonging to namespace Mule. So like that every error has a hierarchy, and this is how the errors can be classified. Errors can be classified two types. First is any and other is critical. So whatever on the left side under any can be handled. We can actually write error handler for handling any of these errors. But the ones on the right side, which are of subtypes critical, cannot be handled. So example of critical error types might be like memory out of memory error, etc. Right? So by default, if you are having a HTTP flow, by default, if there are no exception, a success code will be returned. Success response code will be returned. If there is error, 500 will be returned, and error description will be the payload. So we saw in HTTP listener, we configured actually error responses. In the error responses, I gave error type. By default is error.description. And if you don't define any error response status code, by default it will be 500. That's what we saw here, right? If you want to modify, of course you can go to the responses tab of HTTP endpoint and you can configure whatever status code you feel like. You'll understand about error handling scopes. There are two types of error handling scopes: on error propagate and on error continue. Let us see. Actually, every flow, as we know, has error handling block. Right now I didn't have anything here. Now what I want to do is, in this validate and transform, I want to drag and drop an error handler. So here in the core module, we can see there are two things: on error continue and on error propagate. So firstly I will discuss about on error propagate. I'll drag and drop on error propagate handler here, and inside it I will write some logs. Let us see. I'll drag and drop a logger, and here I'll configure invalidate and transform flow inside on error propagate. Okay, so let us see now. I have configured on error propagate. So actually what will happen, all the processes in the error handling scope are executed. So in this error handling scope, I can have multiple components, like I can drag one more component also. Whatever handlers are, whatever event processes are there in on propagate, on error propagate, they all will be executed. And then the error will be rethrown to the calling flow. What is the calling flow for this validate and transform? The main flow. Here it will be thrown. It will go to here. And here I don't have any error handler. So what will happen? The error gets rethrown and the default error handler will get executed. Let us see. I think this should have restarted after I saved. I'll save it again and I'll wait until this gets restarted. Yep, this is getting restarted once I saved. Now I will give a request to /error. See, now I got the response and I want to see the logs. Here I see that on error propagate handler got executed. Right, so let us see here again. I'll maximize. You can see that there's a log message also, right? Here you can see the log of on error propagate and this is a message, and the logger inside on error propagate also is executed, is it? So the error got propagated from validated transform flow. After this got executed. Okay. Now the error status code is 500. You can see. Now what I'll do is after calling the validate and transform, there is one more logger also here. What is this logging in the main flow? It's saying in main flow after getting all products. Now what I want is in this validate and transform flow, I want to handle the exception and continue to the next rest of the main flow as if nothing has happened. So what I can do is I will delete this on error propagate and I will drag and drop on error continue. Okay, here inside this also again I'll try to write a logger. You just observe here. I'll write in on inside I'll say on error continue. Okay, now I've saved it. Hopefully it should get restarted. Okay, it got restarted. So let me give a request. I'll clear the console first. I'll give a request. I should get, see the response I got status as 200. Okay, I got an empty response. Why? Let's see here. What will happen whenever I give a request? It will come here. The payload is empty when it is at set variable, and when it called flow reference also the payload is still empty, right? And here an exception is occurring. If exception occurs here, the rest of the processes are not executed. It will come to on error continue. This logger is executed. Control comes back as if nothing has happened. Then this logger gets executed. Okay. And then since we said on error continue, actually the meaning is what? The request should continue to the caller as if nothing has happened. So for the main flow, it feels like there was success only. So that's the reason why we got 200. And since there is no payload set, it was empty, right? But if you see the logs, you should observe this log as well as this log. Let us see in the logs. See here. First inside on error continue, then in the main flow, right? So let me summarize. If you are using on error propagate, all processors in the error handling scope are executed. At the end of the scope, rest of the flow that threw the error is not executed. Error is rethrown to the next level and handled there. So that's what happened earlier. Error was rethrown to main flow, and in the main flow there was no handler again, so default error handler got executed, and HTTP listener returned error response earlier. Now the same thing at the end of the scope, if you are using on error continue, the rest of the flow that through the exception is not executed, but event is passed up to the next level as if the flow execution had successfully completed, and HTTP listener returned successful response. So I will show same thing using diagrams, various scenarios. Scenario 1. See here, this is one single flow where I have HTTP listener and there is no error handler. And assume that error occurs here. If error occurs here, what will happen? Subsequent processes are not executed. And since there is no error handler, the default error handler is executed. Error is rethrown. Right? And then HTTP listener returns error response. Right? Okay. Then in the calling flow, this is a main flow, and here there is on error propagate. Error occurs here. As usual, if error occurs, subsequent processes are not executed, right? And whatever you have inside on error propagate is executed. You can see this here. Error gets rethrown. And since you are using on error propagate, the HTTP listener will return error response. Okay. What if you use on error continue here? If you use on error continue, the HTTP listener will return success code, success response, 200 success code, right? So on error continue means return as if nothing has happened. Success response is returned. Then this is very interesting now. This is calling flow is the main flow. From the main flow we are having HTTP listener, we are calling flow reference. In the child flow, let's assume that error occurs in the child flow at this point. Now subsequent processes are not executed, and here in the child flow we have on error propagate. This is executed and the error is rethrown here. Here in this main flow, again we have on error propagate. This also gets executed and this gets rethrown. Now since there is error thrown, HTTP listener will return error response code. Same thing, right? Same thing, you can observe the flow here. And finally, if you see here, another scenario, the main flow is calling child flow, error occurs here. Here we have on error propagate. This gets executed, error gets rethrown. Once it comes here, again on error continue scope is executed. On error continue as we are using, what will happen? Of course, subsequent processes are not executed, but HTTP listener will return success code. Is it? Yes. Finally, let's assume that another scenario. Let's assume that main flow is called child flow. Error occurs here, right? Now, in this child flow, we are using on error continue. So error occurs here. In the child flow, the subsequent processes are not executed. The error, since we are using on error continue, the control will return to main flow as if nothing has happened, as if nothing error has happened. So subsequent process in the main flow are executed, and then HTTP listener returns the status code appropriately, either success or status error code. These are the various scenarios, right? So we understood about how to configure an error handler. Two types of error handlers: on error propagate, on error continue. Okay. Now what I want to do is here in the second flow we are calling another flow get products by name, which is nothing but consuming a SOAP web service. So the control will go to get products by name if this validator is not throwing any error. That means what? We have to pass a query parameter called as product name with HP or Mac. So let me give a request. I've saved it, whatever is modified. I hopefully assume that it got restarted. Okay, I'll pass product name is equals to HP. Now let us see what is the response I'll be getting. I got success response, and of course this is the JSON response which I got, get products by name response. Okay, so what happened? Nothing was, no error was there. From the main flow I called validate flow. This validator that didn't throw any exception. Then the request went to consumer flow, and this has consumed SOAP web service, and I got the response. Okay, but let me see this transform message. Did I write anything? No, I didn't write anything. So if I wanted a pure JSON response, I could have said dot body dot get products by name dot star products. This is XML is the outcome of SOAP web service consumer, right? XML contains a lot of products. So if I want all products as an array, star products, I have modified it, and oh, sorry, it should be dot products dot star product. Actually, product is a repeated element, so I have to put a star here. Okay, now again I will restart it. Okay, it started. Let me give a request. Still I'm getting the same XML. Am I doing something here? No, no exception, but why am I getting it here? After consume, oh, I see some exceptions here. Oh, I think there was an exception here in the logger. Oh, that's the reason. Very good. Actually, in the logger, I have written after web service consumer plus payload, but actually it should be plus plus, right, for concatenation. So because there was an error here in the logger expression, the the control came to on the control came to the caller. This on error continue was executed, and that's why I got success with whatever payload was before the logger. The transformer didn't get executed. Very good actually. Um, it's a very good scenario you saw. So an expression was wrong here for logger, and there is no handler here. Whatever was the payload before logger, that means the output exactly after consume came back to the calling flow. Here on error continue was there. So this was logged and the control came back to main flow as if nothing has occurred. So whatever payload was there, that means the payload exactly from consume component was returned with success status code. That was an error. So now I think I've saved it. So if I give a request, I have modified the problem. I've actually rectified the problem inside logger. Now I use plus plus instead of single plus. So let us see again. I'll try to give a request. Again, I got same response. Let us see on the console. Plus plus payload also was giving an error. This expression was not correct. Oh, since I'm concatenating with string, payload should be a string, but it was something else. So you call plus plus function with string and object. This is the content, right? So what I will do is, as of now, for now, to make sure that everything is going fine, I'll remove this concatenation of plus plus payload. Now this will be fine. I have saved it and I hope everything will be restarted. I'll clear the console to get clarity. Now I'll give a request. Yeah, now I got the transformer executed and I saw the JSON.
Okay, so this video is becoming long, so let us stop this and we'll continue from same point in next video.